This team is Rehanna, Sean, Leona, Arwa, Gagan, and they are, Interac is the sponsor. This is about digital government services. So what are the key limiting factors dictating delayed adoption of digital government services, and how can the Canadian federal government mitigate these risks to bring more government services online? All right, great topic. Take it away. Good luck, folks.
Thank you. Thank you to all those joining today, including our sponsors from Interac, as well as our various stakeholders that are joining virtually. We're grateful to have you here today and excited to present our ideas. So digital transformation is an incredibly complex problem. However, when services are designed poorly, that can often lead to individuals feeling disrespected, unappreciated, and sometimes even discriminated against. Anyone who has waited for long lines for their driver's license or received their passport post-COVID can relate with this feeling of frustration. In fact, Canadians spend an astonishing 99,000 years engaging with government services, often dealing with complex forms and long lines. This feeling of frustration is further exacerbated in part because Canadians have come to expect government services to be on par with large industries like Netflix and Amazon. This stark contrast between the public and the private sector ultimately impacts citizens' trust in the government to provide services that are easy to use and accessible. So today our team, Arwa, Leona, Sean, Rehanna, and myself, will answer the following question put forth by Interac. What are the key limiting factors dictating delayed adoption of citizen-focused digital government services, and how can the Canadian federal government mitigate these risks, bring more government services online? So, to answer this question, we will first set the stage and provide some outline and scope and relevant context. We will then aim to re-examine this policy challenge from a new perspective, proposing the OneGov initiative, which aims to inform our 3 core recommendations. We will then apply these recommendations to a real-life example using IRCC as a case study. We will then end with some considerations and our question-answer period. So for our methodology, we implemented a 3-phase process. First, we began with the first phase, which is scoping and literature review. We then had our second phase, which was the expert interviews, and then our third phase was developing our recommendations. So our work draws on data from existing literature as well as stakeholder interviews. We sampled approximately 28 individuals with expert knowledge, including the Minister of Citizen Services. Our data analysis consists of open-ended questions, grouping the interview responses into 6 broad categories. However, given the constraints of this project, we were only able to analyze a single federal department, and we could not interview users directly. This would have allowed us to incorporate first-hand experiences and obstacles faced by users when trying to access government services. So, however, we did the next best thing, and we interviewed immigration services and lawyers and service providers who shared their second-hand accounts of experiences that users have when accessing government services. I will now pass it off to Arwa, who will talk about why we chose IRCC as our case study.
For this policy challenge, we were tasked at looking at digital transformation efforts across the government. In doing so, our data analysis revealed that the government has a tendency to rapidly digitalize its services during crisis. This is exemplified by the most recent crisis in memory, the COVID-19 pandemic. We've discovered that this momentum, however, does not carry forward and often diminishes after the crisis passes. With rising global tensions, we expect that immigration to Canada is going to increase, and as such, we've decided to focus on RCC for 3 key reasons. The department handles a high volume of applications that is projected to increase as Canada plans to admit 1.5 million permanent residents in the next 3 years. As of 2020, only 20 out of the 72 RCC services were fully online. As applicant number grows, there's a looming risk of system crashes and worsening backlog. Finally, RCC is already undergoing a digital transformation efforts, including advancing the digital platform modernization program, and we believe that this gives us an opportunity to model recommendations in this report on this initiative. During our stakeholder analysis, we've asked government experts to define digital transformation. Surprisingly, they've all offered different definitions for the term. And as such, we've decided to cluster them into 3 distinct categories, hoping to derive a common working definition that relates to them in some way. The first group viewed digital transformation as a process that aims to enhance the way public services are delivered. The second group views digital transformation as a mindset shift and new ways of working. Finally, the third group viewed digital transformation in terms of integrating new and more advanced technologies to modernize public service delivery. Our aim here is to bridge between these gaps by introducing one working definition that relates to them in some way. As such, we define digital transformation as a broader organizational movement that is focused on enhancing service delivery and improving user satisfaction through innovative technologies.
In recent years, Canada has made significant innovations to Canada's digital transformation. Each milestone has built on the success of the previous one. Here are the 5 initiatives that inform our approach to digital transformation. In 2017, Treasureboard created Canadian Digital Service. It's a team that helps government to design and deliver better digital service. Building on this success, Canada joined the Digital Nations Forum and established the Digital Nations Secretariat in 2018. And then Canada created 10 digital standards in 2020. These standards provide the guidance on public servants on how to use technology to deliver a quality service that Canadians expect from the government. To practice these standards, Canada created Service Lab in 2021. It's an experimental approach that allows users to engage with early age stage. All this success built up the biggest milestone towards Canadian digital transformation. Last year, 2023, Canada launched the Minister of Citizen Service, which is a new cabinet role who's responsible for developing digital service, improving digital standards, and making Canadian government more accessible. Even though Canada did many significant and creative innovations during these 8 years, Canada still lay behind internationally. According to United Nations E-Government Index, Canada's position in Global Governance Index, government have slipped from 3rd place in 2010 to 32nd in 2022. And this drop may be partially explained by 6 key barriers that we discovered through our research and interviews. The first one is Canadian assumptionism. It refers to Canada's unique features such as large land area, time preference, and bilingual language. They are always set as the challengers when adopting digital transformation. The second one is silo structure of the public service. This hinders digital transformation is because each department have their own specific needs instead of common goal in the whole service. It's also because privacy regime make it difficult to share data. It limits the personal data sharing from one department to another. The third one is culture of risk aversion. In the public service system, there's always few rewards for success, but many consequences for failure. This holds the public leaders to a rightful scrutiny from public. It's also forced them to adopt a defensive stance, and avoiding anything could be considered as a mistake. The fourth one is a lack of common language between policy and IT team, which leads to misunderstanding, miscommunication, and project failures. The overly complex projects from policy team will lead to the impractical situation and prolonged project by IT team. The fifth one is a legacy system. This is referred to the current language model which used by the government, where the efforts to replace them have been so slow and costly. And this outdated language model is no longer be taught in school. Thus, Shared Service Canada have to train new IT hires on programming coding language, taking IT talent and resources away from other projects. The last one is complicated procurement, where the government bidding contracts are very complicated and do not communicate their needs well to the potential vendors. This always discourages the vendors from bidding process. And even if a vendor wins the contract, meeting these demands can go over beyond time and budget limit. As a result, the final product may be so specialized on the vendor scale, which leads to long-term dependency. Now we are going to talk about how to address these barriers from our recommendation.
Okay, so after identifying the 6 barriers to digital transformation that Leona just mentioned, We reviewed each of these barriers to see which ones were mentioned most often by our stakeholders and were described as most important by our stakeholders. From that exercise, 3 problems emerged as most urgent. These problems are listed in the first column of this diagram. The first problem is that currently government departments are extremely siloed. The second problem is there is a culture of risk aversion in the public service. The third problem is that the federal government's procurement process is currently very complicated. Going back to the conversation around definitions of digital transformation that we had earlier, we define digital transformation as a broader organizational concept that entails a cultural change. Issues related to digital transformation cannot therefore be solved with just a single program. It will require a durable solution. That's why we're excited to introduce the philosophy of OneGov. OneGov does not see digital transformation as a goal. Rather, it sees digital transformation as an ongoing journey. OneGov is more than just a program, a project, or a product. It is an guiding philosophy that will spark a mindset shift in the Canadian public service so that digital transformation is sustained long-term. We chose the word OneGov because it exemplifies the vision that we have for the government, one in which users see the government as a unified entity that can deliver public services that are simple, connected, and effective. We used the philosophy of OneGov to come up with 3 core recommendations that address each of the problems that I just mentioned. We are now going to discuss these recommendations in detail. The first recommendation under OneGov is One Platform. This aims to break down the silos between federal government departments in order to create a seamless experience for users. This recommendation is based on OECD's policy framework for digital government, which also informed the 3 requirements for this recommendation. Let's first talk about the first requirement, which is improved data sharing infrastructure between federal government departments. One thing that we repeatedly heard from our stakeholders is that Canada's privacy regime makes it really difficult for federal government departments to share information with one another. That's why we're proposing to modernize consent forms to explicitly ask users for informed consent when their information is going to be shared among federal departments. Under this modernized regime, when departments enter a data sharing agreement, users will be required to ask users for their consent or permission so that they can share their personal information, so that instead of users having to submit the same information to different government departments over and over again, they will only have to do that once. This is called the Tell Us Once approach and will result in a more convenient and faster experience for users. The second requirement under this recommendation is a centralized service portal where users will be able to access and gain more information on services that are offered by the Government of Canada. Currently, if you go to canada.ca, which is the Government of Canada's website, you will see that it has a comprehensive list of government services that are offered by the government. However, these links are arranged according to the department that offers the service, rather than by use case or service need. This is why 70% of Canada.ca visitors reported experiencing difficulty when finding the service that they need on the website or long completion tasks that they intended to do on Canada.ca. In order to enable and accelerate digital transformation, users will need to have a better experience when interacting with online services. We know that a centralized service portal will go a long way in making that happen. The third requirement for this recommendation is a single digital ID. This aims to reduce the friction between users and government services. Again, if you go to canada.ca, you will see that there's a link that says sign into my account. But if you click on that link, it will take you to a page that lists 89 various Government of Canada accounts. So we propose to consolidate all these login systems into a secure and single digital ID so that users will have to remember fewer usernames and fewer passwords when accessing online services. Okay, so this chart shows how our recommendation will impact current government services. The left side of the chart shows how or what the government looks like today from a user's perspective. It shows how siloed government departments result in fragmented client-facing services. If you've accessed an online service from the government before, you would know that you need to log into a different account or go to a different website every time your service need changes. The right side of this diagram shows what the government will look like under OneGov. As you can see with our recommendation, you will be able to sign in only once using your secure digital ID to this centralized government platform where you'll be able to access all of the services that the Government of Canada offers. The idea is you will be able to complete activities such as filing your taxes, applying for employment insurance, or applying for citizenship, all from one place. This recommendation offers huge time savings for both the users and the government. Having said all that, we recognize that there are privacy risks that are associated with this recommendation. That's why in our brief, we actually conducted a detailed privacy analysis to ensure that this recommendation is compliant with Canada's existing privacy laws. So we ensure that the first recommendation is compliant with the Privacy Act by, if you look at the right-hand side of the diagram again, you will see that from the user side, you will be able to access all these services from one place, but each department, so CRA, for example, and Employment Services, and Development Canada, and IRCC, will still have its own separate database. And this way, departments will only be able to access the information that they need to provide the service that was requested by the user. The result is a simpler, more time-efficient, and less duplicative experience for users, while government departments remain compliant with the Privacy Act. I'm now going to pass it off to Gagan, who will talk about the second recommendation.
So our second recommendation, in line with the philosophy of OneGov, is to make government digitalization sustainable in the long run by reworking how government services are developed through DGUs 2.0 or Digital Government Units 2.0. Historically, governments have operated by default from a project management perspective, working on large-scale projects with long timelines and big launches. In contrast with this often linear approach, we propose a standardized circular process that focuses on product development, incorporating early user testing and encouraging interdisciplinary collaboration. This recommendation is inspired by the work of Amanda Clark on digital government units and formulates the basis of our 3 requirements. The first requirement is incorporating multidisciplinary teams that work together from initial product development all the way to the final product. Civil servants and policymakers are often trained to develop services in silos, away from developers and IT experts. So as the government begins to evolve and modernize, success is therefore determined by combining these skills of hugely diverse specialists into a single unit, minimizing costs and reducing delays. This means integrating within DGUs everyone from policy experts to tech designers. Our second requirement focuses on design and iterative development of online services that incorporates user feedback through alpha-beta testing. Often services are developed from the perspective of government, which prioritizes their own governmental efficiencies over the experience of individuals. So taking a more experimental approach, we propose an enhanced development process that initiates early prototyping. So starting with something like an alpha version of the product that is tested on a small number of individuals and then is later revised based on their feedback using that service, which eventually leads to the beta version of that product that goes through a similar process, eventually leading to our final product. This iterative approach ensures that products are exposed to users often, allowing for real-world validation before the final release. It also prioritizes user feedback. By engaging throughout the development process, we can avoid pitfalls of creating products that fail to meet user needs and expectations. So finally, for our third requirement, this involves concurrent reviews. So with regulatory assessment processes occurring simultaneously with the development, we can minimize regulatory delays. So traditionally, civil servants are trained to develop services linearly, with products being reviewed only after being built by the developers. So we propose combining this process with developers, policymakers, and legal experts all working together to simultaneously build a service while also ensuring regulatory compliance. This means that lawyers and consultants will be involved at the beginning of the process so that they can conduct their regulatory assessments as that product is being developed. So, taking something like the Canadian Retirement Income Calculator, traditionally, sometimes coined as the waterfall method, this approach is very linear. So, using rough numbers, the retirement calculator was built within around 4 months. However, after the product is built, it sits used for an additional 18 months for policy assessment and regulatory compliance, thus resulting in a total of 22 months, adding almost 2 years to the process. However, if we were to include all relevant individuals from the beginning, not only would we be able to combine the skills and expertise from the start of the process, but we'd also be able to cut an additional 4 months from the regulatory process and minimize other costs, including learning and psychological costs that occur when we have to catch up individuals when they're not there at the beginning of the process. Therefore, with DGUSE 2.0, we recommend a more circular approach, by first creating multiple prototypes with subsequent iterations, and then simultaneously building the product while also completing other administrative duties. We will now pass it off to Rahana, who will speak about recommendation number 3.
Our third recommendation under OneGov aims to make the government a smarter buyer, enabling them to better understand technology in order to reduce vendor reliance, buying expensive digital tools with limited use, and ultimately avoid massive failure of million-dollar IT projects such as ArriveCAN. This recommendation ultimately intends to save taxpayers valuable money and enhance citizens' trust. Inspired by Sean Booth's and Amanda Clark's playbook on modern IT procurement, we propose 3 requirements to this recommendation. Our first requirement highlights strengthening digital procurement capacity by upskilling public servants, including senior leadership on IT projects, and making this training mandatory for procurement officers. This training should include writing requests for proposals in simple language with clear objectives, prioritizing requirements that meet users' need. They should consider 3 questions before starting any procurement process: what to buy, who to buy it from, and what is being bought to ensure that they select the right vendor. Our second requirement focuses on awarding smaller contracts by adopting modular contracting as a best practice. Modular contracting is basically a strategy where large contracts are broken into smaller phases in terms of both value and duration. It allows to identify early breakpoint and improve it with iterative feedback loop. Global best practices recommend that the government should cap spending control at $2 million and limit contract duration to 6 months for better IT project management and to break vendor lock-in. Our third and final requirement is adopting a buy once, use many times approach, where we underscore the importance of investing in technology with common needs across departments for long-term usability. In order to do so, the government should first identify the common needs across departments and then consolidate contracts with open source licensing. Open sourcing is important because departments can review the purchase tools and adapt them to the service they provide. This saves cost and reduces duplicative efforts. This buy once, use many times approach was implemented by the Canada School of Public Service in modernizing their learning platform D2L Brightspace. This not only transformed CSPS's experience, but it also supported 13 additional departments in adapting the same platform using the same contract. With this effort, CSPS saved approximately 2 years of duplicative procurement process and 18 months of cybersecurity checks. This chart shows how our recommendation will change the procurement practice. The left hand shows the existing procurement process of the government, and the right hand shows how smarter procurement under OneGov would look like. Currently, the government conducts an industry day to assemble vendors. However, they develop requests for proposal without consulting the vendors. Finally, they award bids to them with long contracts and no breakpoints. The teams that create these proposals often lack digital knowledge. As such, they develop hard-to-meet requirements for vendors that discourage many of them from participating in the bid. Additionally, by longer contract, it is difficult to change a vendor if they cannot fully execute a contract, as too much money and time have been invested. In contrast, our recommendation with these three requirements is well positioned to change the way the government buys digital tools through building an informed procurement team who would award smaller contracts to different vendors and only renew based on successful implementation. This will eventually make services more efficient, accessible, and enhance users' experience.
Okay, so having seen how the discussed recommendations can be broadly applied to the entire government, it would be helpful to spend some time looking at IRCC as a case study and a guide to examine how they can be applied to a specific department. Applying our first recommendation of a single platform and better data sharing framework, we aim to create a more efficient decision-making process from IRCC's end and a less redundant experience from the user's end. IRCC's current digitalization project, DPM, explicitly aims to create a single online application for its clients. However, DPM only aims to consolidate immigration applications. Applying our OneGov framework here, we aim to unify access to services beyond immigration, to include services such as taxes or social benefits. With a single digital login, we hope that IRCC clients will only have to use one account irrespective of the service they are seeking. From our second recommendation, we're hoping to use our DGU 2.0 framework to break down the 6-year DPM timeframe into smaller, more iterative phases that are managed by multidisciplinary teams. This means that we have to assemble all relevant IRCC personnel from the very beginning. This team then will have to restructure the DPM timeframe to an initial 4-month phase that involves creating and testing an alpha version of DPM among a sample of IRCC clients. Finally, from our third recommendation, we're hoping to adopt modular contracting to break down these vendor-long contracts into 2 years each and phase them into a 6-month increment. Each phase should end with a major milestone being met and a performance evaluation conducted to see if the vendor met the contract requirements. Renewals here should only be based on successful performance indicators.
Now that we've seen how our recommendations could be implemented by a single department such as IRCC, we now hope to provide you with a picture of how our recommendations could be implemented across the federal public service. Because as we mentioned at the top of our presentation, our policy challenge asks us to look at the entire federal government more broadly. But before we go to this table, we would like to acknowledge that costing these recommendations was extremely difficult and that we might be miles off the actual values. However, we would like to say that our costing exercise allowed us to conduct a cost-benefit analysis to validate our recommendations and to know how other jurisdictions costed similar initiatives. The first recommendation of one platform will be implemented jointly by the Treasury Board, Secretariat of Canada, and Service Canada. This is consistent with the mandate of the President of the Treasury Board and the Minister of Citizen Services. We expect that it will cost around $185 million based on the experience of Australian government's procurement of a similar technology of one platform and based on US estimates of how much it would cost to construct digital ID infrastructure. We expect that this one platform will be launched as early as 2028. The second recommendation of digital government units will be implemented within each individual departments through their chief information officers. We estimate that this will cost around $51 to $65 million, based again on the experience of Australia Digital Transformation Agency, but also of Ontario Digital Service. We anticipate that DGUs can be implemented as early as next year. The third recommendation, making the government as a smart buyer, will be implemented by the Public Service and Procurement Canada, or PSPC. We are aware that there are already procurement teams within each department, but we see PSPC's role here as an entity that will train IT procurement teams within each department to strengthen in-house IT procurement capacity. Because this recommendation proposes a change in an approach, we do not anticipate that it will incur a significant cost to PSPC. So we anticipate that it will be, the cost will be covered under PSPC's current annual budget of $4 billion through reallocation of resources. We anticipate that this recommendation will be implemented in the fiscal year 2025 to 2026 by making it a priority in PSPC's departmental plan. As we conclude, we would like to acknowledge that there are real challenges to digital transformation. However, there are also numerous talented individuals who have been working hard to solve these challenges in the last few years. Some of them are here today, joining us in person and on Zoom. We hope that through our OneGov proposal, we will be able to meaningfully advance the work that they have started. And we hope that OneGov will ignite a digital transformation renaissance that will deliver better public services that not just meet, but exceed the expectations of Canadians. Thank you.
Okay, the OneGov team, well done. Judges, who's number one? Shaq.
So thank you for that presentation. Great presentation. So central to your first recommendation with OneGov is obviously uptake. And a lot of Canadians don't have great experiences with government technology, digitization. You mentioned that one way to overcome this is a consent form where they just say, yes, you can share my information. But I mean, given the past experiences, given people are hesitant to share their privacy and their information, what if millions of people just say, no, I'm not going to consent to this? How would you overcome that barrier?
Thank you. Great question. I was hoping somebody would ask that. The trade-offs of putting a 40-page report in a 30-minute presentation is that we have to cut a lot of things. But what we did in our report is that to encourage this consent form agreement was to encourage Canada to adopt a self-sovereign identity model, just like Finland did. And in this model, you are sovereign over your own information, just like the name implies. So what happens usually is that you download a digital wallet, you authenticate yourself, and then your information is with you, not anyone else. And then whenever you want to engage with a service, it will generate a query that explicitly tells you in non-legal jargon what you need to show in order to access that service, and you will personally click on what you need to show. So to exemplify this, let's say you want to go purchase some alcohol and you want to show your ID, right? But you don't want to show all information. So in that digital wallet, you would only show your image and your age without showing your address, your date of birth, or any other information. And then after that query is generated, your data will be deleted to minimize data retention periods and enhance your privacy. And so what we did in the report is that we acknowledged that actually not even all departments have consent forms. And we wanted to make that more implicit within a sovereign identity data model.
Brave presentation on an issue that has eluded the federal government for many years. My question is, this all sounds great, but we actually haven't been able to implement things in the federal government. So how much did you look at, for example, the learnings, I'm hoping there are some, from the Phoenix disaster, and even in this the last piece, you talked about implementation by department. When we recognize departments are really siloed, that's part of the problem. So my question is less on the actual recommendations, but what work you did to really look at, but how would this actually get implemented by government? Dare I say, how do we just get good management?
So the reason why we proposed OneGov is we recognize that what was really needed is a change in mindset and culture in a public service. And really with, for example, the experience of Phoenix, what was really needed is will from the leadership, and leadership being able to lead that change and say that we need this to happen. speaking to whether or not we looked at Phoenix, we did look at Phoenix, but it was not included in our report just because we decided early on that we were only focused on client-facing services, whereas Phoenix is a pay system, and so it was an internal system. But something that we took from that is one, the procurement, for example, procurement of that platform. That's why we wanted to award, part of a requirement for making the government a smarter buyer is awarding smaller contracts so that there are more regular checkpoints and there's more accountability for vendors if they don't actually deliver what was expected of them. In terms of part of Phoenix also was that the federal government got rid of the pay advisors really quickly when they transitioned to Phoenix. And so the requirement about multidisciplinary teams comes in really handy here. We think that there needs to be there needs to be a smooth transition whenever a procurement of a new technology happens, and that again PSPC will lead that training of making sure that each department, when they procure a technology, they will know what skills are needed to use the technology and to utilize technology to the best of their advantage. As to who is going to implement this, because it's such a big recommendation, we put in a report that it will primarily be TBS, who will spearhead the philosophy of OneGov and making sure that is an organization-wide, government-wide mindset that is adopted. And to even make that into a more concrete step, we also said that the Canada School of Public Service, they have a digital academy. They will be tasked to create all these courses and workshops that will hopefully instill the philosophy of OneGov, not just to digital experts, but to all public servants.
I think it's also important to note that we want to work with government, and we don't want to completely change the way that they operate, completely, have this like startup mentality that a lot of reports explain needing. And that's why we kind of kept the bit of the siloing, but just encouraging sort of education around technology and IT procurement and how we can inform our public servants about what digital transformation is, and encouraging one another to learn from one another as well. And I also think in terms of speaking about public-facing failures as well, in terms of with Phoenix, having an iterative process is key, because you can have this controlled release of the product. Essentially, you can have an alpha version that's released to a small number of individuals and actually test whether or not it works, and then kind of scale up from there. And so that sort of helps buffer some of those big public-facing failures that the government has been dealing with in recent years. So.
I just have to make a comment on one area that's, I think, particularly brilliant. So by way of background, I was the Deputy Minister of Finance for a while in BC and also the Deputy Minister of Treasury Board. And I think it's brilliant and crazy to put Treasury Board heading this. It's crazy because they know nothing about this subject and their whole job is to say no and define problems and risk, and they're very conservative. But, it's also brilliant in the sense that often in my experience, which is vast, they are the ones who often put many of these time lag issues and onerous restrictions on everything, trying to get rid of every risk. And so to make them kind of the champions of a new philosophy could really be a driver once they get their head around it and the skills on it. So it's brave and crazy, but also brilliant, I think. My question is around what I'm seeing is a bit of a dichotomy between wanting to have like a single platform or largely single platform streamlined, and the recommendation to have smaller contracts. Mm-hmm. So I can see smaller contracts in lots of forms of procurement where you're purchasing commodities, pieces of ships, things like that. But for an enterprise system like this, that doesn't make so much sense to me, where you'd think you'd want a platform system. So can you help me square that circle, please?
Sure, that is a great question. So the reason why for our timeline we say that it will not be launched until 2028 is because we expect that it will be built iteratively. And by that we mean we think that it's still possible to award smaller contracts for vendors who will do this. We spoke a lot about the Australian government experience of implementing a similar government platform. And their experience is that in phase one of their process is they awarded only a smaller value of contract to, I want to say Deloitte who did this, or maybe, sorry, I don't want to name, I might be incorrect, but to a vendor, and then it was only awarded for 2 years. And so there was an expectation for the vendor to come up with a minimum viable product to show that, yes, we will pay you for this minimum viable product, and we'll see whether that's something that we want and Australian citizens want. So expect the same thing in terms of implementation of a single platform, where it might not be 2 months or 3 months or 6 months in terms of the smaller duration of the contract, but we believe that we could still divide the 4-year timeline, 4-year timeline from now until then into smaller phases, so that a minimum viable product is first launched and then evaluated by the government, and then before it will go to alpha testing, like what Gagan said, into a beta test, before launching it into a bigger platform. A big part of costs related to a technology like single platform is one. I don't mean to sound like an expert in this technology, but server costs and maintenance costs. If we limit that launch in the alpha and beta versions to a smaller number of people, we don't expect that it will rise to the values that, for example, Phoenix was awarded to in the very beginning.
Thanks. Very clear presentation. I guess one question I wanted to ask was about the user side of it, and I guess part of that is how you documented how much of the government services how many are available online, but even of those that are available, to what extent does the public use them, and sort of wonder if you've been looking at that and why. I mean, I think I suspect everybody in this room has had experience with some of the lack of user friendliness of government platforms. I mean, even a week or so ago, I spent a couple of hours trying to figure out how to file something online, and then eventually printed it and put it in the mail to Prince Edward Island. So it's basically with that kind of experience. I mean, there's a need not just for more comprehensiveness, but also for quality of the services. And I guess with that in mind, sort of wonder to what extent you'd looked at, and I know you can't go around and interview users, that's not in the scope of your project, but there's been research. I mean, some of Amanda Clark's recent work, I think, has been sort of built on surveys of the public on their attitudes, and some of the issues that were raised about the sort of privacy, and you build in the protections, but the fact that even with those protections, and you could tell everybody, well, is this all compliant with the privacy rules? A lot of people are just not going to trust the government, and to sort of pool their employment information with their pension information and everything else, even though in principle that should, it's all the same government. They should have it. Yeah. They should have it all together, so that you're not telling them different things in different, contradictory things in different fora. But sort of recognize that the whole issue of digital ID and that sort of thing is really fraught, and maybe some people are even politicizing it. So. So anyway, interested in your reactions on just generally that user side and how the public responds to all this.
So I'll speak to the user side. I think one thing that I want to note is that within this Think Digital Academy by David Eves, I believe, they state that individuals are more willing to forgo their data for more personalized services. And so if you do make things more convenient, more accessible, individuals are willing to give up their data to do that. And obviously there is this misconception that, governments misusing personal data, but I would say governments take many more precautions to protect people's data than some private industries do. Meta, for example. And so I think obviously that there needs to be a narrative and there needs to be an educational push to ensure that individuals' data is secure. Also, to create more personalized services, we implement that first recommendation. And I think it also, for example, we worked with Peace Geeks and we talked to them about how new immigrants deal with public services when they come to Canada. And there's a lot of frustration because it's all done from the government's perspective. And it's not done by like, hey, you come to Canada, which province do you want to go to? And why do you want to come to Canada? That should be the first step instead of being like more of the administrative duties when you come in. And so I think when we do an alpha test, we use the actual target population to make sure that the users' needs are being met and expectations are being met. And so I think that decreases some of that frustration, but then also works to build trust. And so maybe that would be helpful. But I'm gonna give it to Arwa to talk about the ID.
Just first of all about the user experience, I think part of why it's siloed goes back to how even public servants define digital transformation. This was a very interesting trend that emerged from the responses that we're interviewing them. And we can see that the way the department defines even digital transformation sort of informs the way they deliver those services. And this is why we have a uniform sort of non-horizontal digital transformation across departments, where you have one department that is way ahead than others. But back to the privacy piece. This was an issue that we grappled with, having to balance that organizational efficiency of a more seamless data sharing platform, giving the users consent, but then on the other side, trying to keep the user's privacy intact. And what we came up with was a model to centralize it only from the user's experience while still keeping department access to databases a little bit siloed. And we also decided to make it an opt-in option rather than a default one. But that doesn't mean that if you don't opt in, you're not going to reap the benefits of digital transformation. And I think one of our stakeholders really put it beautifully. The story went along like, oh, my mom wouldn't want to consent to these forms, so what would she do? And the answer was that, well, even if she doesn't want to consent to these forms, at least when she calls or she mails, she needs to have the ability to reap the benefits of a digitally transformed call center or a department that's able to give those services very efficiently.
Okay. We've got 12 or 14 minutes, so we're moving on to sponsors. So do we have sponsors online or? Very good. There we go.
Hello.
I don't want to put my back to anyone. I'll just, I don't have a lot, but you guys know I do have a question. First of all, I just wanted to say that it's really genuinely been my pleasure to work with these students. These guys are awesome, and watching them work together so well as a team, and really, put a lot of effort into the output has been really great. From our perspective, the methodology that they used to tackle the problem statement was well thought out and very sound. The research that they did was very thorough, and the recommendations are actionable. And it's been a great process watching them continue to iterate, because there's been, lots of feedback and questions and digging deep. And it's been really great to see how things have continued to iterate, and they never gave up. And, so that's been really great. The one question that I wanted to ask each of you is just briefly, what's one thing that you've learned from the experience that, is going to stick with you, that you'll take forward as you embark on whatever's next?
Okay. I'll go first so that the one steals my answer and I don't have to think of another one. I think for me, it's really the fact that there's a community, albeit it's a bit small, but there's a small dedicated community who are who are committed to making this digital transformation happen, no matter how like hard it is with the bureaucratic structure of the government. I'm just inspired by that, and I think, yeah, just being able to see how committed they are into this work over the last few years has been amazing. So that's something that I will take away.
Well, you stole my answer.
That's what I wanted to go for.
I guess I'll go next. I think it also transformed the way we even engage with those services. I remember maybe last week, I came in and I'm like, hey guys, I'm doing groceries, and the self-check-in is like not working, and it's not even a self-check-in, and it's supposed to be fast and efficient. And so we started seeing what we were learning from our stakeholders and from our literature reviews and research into the very tiny experiences that we're having every day, and taking this knowledge away has been fascinating and just heartwarming, I guess. We sold both of your answers.
I think something that I learned is that good teamwork goes a long way. So I'm just really happy to be able to work with these guys, and I'm not gonna cry. But yeah, I think that was just a really rewarding experience, and yes, it's coming to an end, but we're good. Yeah, I'll leave it with that. Leona, you go.
Yeah. From this process, I was surprised what Canada been did for like last 10 years. I remember first time when I used Canada CA when I applied for a travel document. It's in 2015, and I use my GCK. I have to remember many questions and password. And when I applied for my immigration in last year, like the year before, I can use Interact, like just log in, just easy. I don't have to remember all the name. And I do hope like one day, like Service Canada, like the SIN number can also use the one platform. Like I don't have to remember everything. Yeah.
Exactly.
As an international student, when I applied for my study permit, I was surprised that why do I have to submit like hard papers, hard copies? By working on this project, now I learned why and how to improve it with OneGov. Thank you.
Thank you guys very much. I really wanted to applaud you. Thank you.
Thank you. Are we done?
Okay.
Oh, we're doing word more.
Who's next? Open it up to the floor for any questions.
Andrew has a question.
Andrew Potter.
You can answer.
That was super interesting. I thought Martha's question was a bit mean. Was like, oh, this is Canada. Do you not live here? But there is one aspect of that I thought was a bit curious that I didn't hear mentioned, which is bilingualism. And maybe it plays no role in all of this, but even the branding of it as YouGov is not going to work in Canada because you need to have a bilingual sort of branding on that, right? Yeah. Which is why everything's like garbage Ottawa garbage, right? Or that kind of stuff. So I wonder, did that come up at all? Like, what are the frictional costs of having to do the bilingual piece on all this?
It did.
Yeah, I can speak to that. I think there was a large conversation around Canadian exceptionalism, and so through some of our interviews talking about bilingualism, Canada's large geography, and as well as what was the third one?
10 provinces.
Yeah, the 10 provinces and interdisciplinary relationships. And of course, that's always going to be an issue. But I think we kind of approached it as an opportunity. So developing these services using both French and English and providing them in both languages. And then also just creating good services can help bridge the gap between provinces by having better experiences with the federal government. And I think when I applied for my federal government loans, and it was a great experience, and I'm out west, it was actually a very positive experience for me and made me feel a bit closer to the federal government. And so even when we're in a digital age, even though we all live very far away, when we are all digitalized, it can also help us feel closer. Mm-hmm. And so we saw these sort of reasons that were coming up more as opportunities. So yeah.
Right. Can I just follow up quickly?
Of course.
I mean, that's great. But
Yeah.
I guess the question is, for your costing, right? If you go to Australia, they tried 184 million, right, for their platform. Do you need to double that in a bilingual environment, or is it just like you run it through Google Translate and it costs you $50, right? Like, I wonder, do you have any sense of where that sits?
Yeah, so in terms of costing, so the $185 million is not just the technology. So part of that is technology. Like I said earlier, a part of that is just the first phase of the Australian government's procured technology. So their first phase was only $20 million. And then we also included personal costs, which we estimated to be around 20 full-time staff at a IT3 level in the government, which was about 100,000. And then the largest, the most expensive part of that recommendation is the digital ID infrastructure. And we found that it would estimate around $110 million. In terms of bilingualism, whether or not we included that in the cost, the answer is no. But that's why we said in the beginning that we might be miles off the actual figures. There was a conversation around us whether we should just have ranges for every single platform, but that was the most concrete costing what we could come up with, and we recognize that there are non-tangibles that we could have not included in the costing.
Okay, I think we've got 2 questions on the screen on Zoom. Is that correct, Weston?
Sure. Who's moderating?
Who's better?
Okay. Hi, Viet.
Hey, how good? Good job. If I burp, it's because I'm recovering from a food poisoning. But wonderful, wonderful presentation, wonderful job. A question that I had is actually surrounding sort of Indigenous data sovereignty. Particularly, I think the framework that we have in Canada, right, is that Indigenous data ownership is recognized as an important thing, and so that's why the data ownership or data sharing is done at the departmental or sometimes even service by service level. And so how is that sort of one government approach consistent with or allow you to take into account Indigenous nations relations?
It's just Section 7 of Privacy Act. You're good to go.
Okay, I'll start and then Arwa will answer. In terms of the data ownership of the Indigenous peoples, we so again in our brief we actually have a section on Section 7 and Section 8 of the Privacy Act, and we ensure that our recommendations will be compliant with existing privacy laws. And as we mentioned earlier, departments will still have their own database, like separate database, and they will only be able to access the information that they need whenever they need to provide a service. Do you want to?
Yeah, I can go ahead.
Yeah.
Thank you. I don't know which screen I should look at, but anyway, I think what we did is that Section 7 of the Privacy Act stipulates that the department may only obtain or collect any data that is in alignment with its service mandate. And so this is why we wanted to just centralize the experience from the user side, but keep it siloed from the department. But other than that, we really wanted to go a step further and putting people in charge of their own data. And this is why we also suggested the self-sovereign identity framework, where you are your data and you keep it on you. And if the government wants to really collect or obtain any of it, they have to go through you first, where you explicitly consent. Because we did this fun exercise where we went through different accounts and we found that not each department asks you for consent. It is implicit because they're thinking that they're collecting the data in line with their mandate. And so we really want to make that explicit. We really want to make you in charge of your data. And we really want to introduce data minimization practices where the query is deleted after, where it's not retained, and where it's with you on your person and within like encryption and verified methods. Although recognizing that we do say that there should be more robust periodic reviews by the Office of the Privacy Commissioner and better encryption data languages to keep that all of that safe, really.
Okay, I think our final question for this session is from Colin Deacon. Senator Colin Deacon. Welcome, Senator.
Hello.
Hi,
Great
Senator.
to be listening in, and congratulations. I really enjoyed my conversation with the 5 of you and impressed with where you got to. So congratulations to all of your instructors and coaches and mentors through this process as well.
Thank you.
One of the biggest challenges we have is the way we manage risk in Canada in governments ends up actually creating it. And so what incentives, what carrots and sticks would you recommend putting in place? I see Ryan Edrosov put a similar point into his comment online. And that, to me, that's really crucial, because if there are not consequences for inaction or over risk management, we won't make this progress in a timely and affordable way. So what suggestions do you have? Thanks so much, and thanks for inviting me to listen in.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Senator. I think to start your question, I think, again, I just want to reiterate, I think we want to work with government instead of trying to change the way that government operates. And the way that I see this happening is through our first recommendation, which is having agile development. And through agile development, we can mitigate risk, which allows public servants to want to adopt this recommendation and actually take on government digitalization, because it's more controlled and you have a small user base that you can test your product on before launching it, and have more assurance and security that what you're putting forth out there is actually serving the community and is intended to do what it's supposed to do. And so for me, this is one large way that we can mitigate risk, and it's sort of an outflow of a product of this recommendation that individuals know that they're backed up and that they'll be more likely to take risks because they can go through this iterative process, ensuring that products are developed in a safe manner that represents the needs of citizens. So I think it will hopefully breed a culture of risk-taking with some precautions built in. Does anyone else want to add?
Thank you very much, team. Great job. Okay, folks, we have a half-hour break, and then we're coming back with Imagine Canada and employment in the nonprofit sector at 2:30. See you then.